And now as we move closer to our first keynote address, I would like to introduce our own Archon, Harry Demas, who will introduce our first keynote speaker. Harry has been an inspiration and a creative force in our parish for many, many years. His tireless work is legendary and contagious. He makes us all work. He has worn many hats in the service of St. Catherine and his home parish in Westfield, New Jersey. He is a past president, treasurer, and council member. Through his skilled fundraising abilities, we were able to entirely pay off our mortgage a year ago this month. And we are, I should say, very fortunate to have someone of Harry's caliber in our parish. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Harry Demas.
Good afternoon. I hope everybody can hear me correctly. The speaker that I'm about to introduce to you or to present to you this afternoon requested that his introduction be very brief. I find that very challenging, but I will do my very best to comply with his wishes. He's a medical doctor and an archon of the Ecumenical Patriarchate, where he holds the position of National Commander, and believe it or not, he devotes more than 40 hours a week on each one of those two responsibilities, in addition to being a devoted husband, father, and grandfather. His position as a National Commander of the Archons results in his having to travel extensively throughout the United States, Europe, and other parts of the world, and more specifically to Turkey, where the Ecumenical Patriarchate is located. And of course, throughout all of these travels is to promote religious freedom. His accomplishments are many, and yet frustrating in many ways. And I believe he may even touch on that too in his presentation. When in high school, he was a page to the U.S. Senate. He earned his BA and MA degrees in 1975 in political science from the University of Pennsylvania, and in 1978, he graduated Duke University Medical School. That in itself tells you that this is a man with no nonsense. He's a man of action. Somebody that can get those two degrees, BS in arts and MA in arts, and graduate medical school in less than 8 years is truly a tremendous accomplishment. He's president and owner of Busselton Radiology Associates. He's married to Dr. Maria Borden Liberakis, a family practitioner, and together they have 3 children and 2 grandchildren. He's a member of the Archdiocesan Council of the Greek Orthodox Church of America and the Board of Trustees of Hellenic College in Brookline, Massachusetts. He has been the recipient of numerous awards and honors, including an honorable doctorate degree in humanities from Hellenic College, the Ellis Island Medal of Honor, the Athenagora Human Rights Award from the Order of St. Andrew the Apostle, and this is the highest distinction of the Greek Orthodox Church in America. The Charles A. Dukes Award, Duke University's highest recognition for volunteer service to the university, and the Duke Medical Center Distinguished Service Award, just to mention a few. It is indeed a pleasure and an honor for me to present to you Dr. Anthony Limberakis.
Our Harry Demas, that was most gracious and very, very generous of you, sir. And my mom would be very gleeful to be present with us. And my dad, of blessed memory, is watching above. Allow me to first express words of gratitude to Father Philemon, Dr. Demopoulos, and the great team here at St. Catherine, Regional Commander John Skirtis, Harry Demas, to put this Religious Freedom Symposium together. The conclusion and the outreach and the goals you have that will be enumerated later on in the program is something that the archons themselves, we do on a daily basis. Educate, reach out, visit politicians, decision makers, political leaders. Why? Because one of the ancient churches of Christianity, the Ecumenical Patriarchate of Constantinople, is experiencing an incredible and unbelievable religious freedom deficit. It does not have the fundamental religious freedom and human rights that only 30% of the world's population, 7 billion people, 2 billion enjoy religious freedom, and 5 billion do not. 30% enjoy fundamental human rights, and 70% do not. Think about that. As the earlier video suggested, the Christians are the most oppressed religious community in the world. Where are Christians? Where do they reside? Well, first of all, we represent a third of the world's population. Christians represent a third of the world's population, 2.2 billion. Islam, 20%. 86% of the world's 86% of the inhabitants of North and South America are Christian. In the United States, almost 80% are Christian. In Europe, 3/4 are Christian. And here you see, I have a lot of buttons here. Focus this. There we go. 1/4 of the Christians in Europe are Orthodox, 35% Catholic, and you can see the statistics yourself. We migrate south. Christians in the Middle East and North Africa. We represent 3.8%, 4% of the population. And if you consider all of North Africa and the Middle East, the Orthodox and the Catholics represent tiny minorities of the populations endemic to that region. If you just consider the Middle East per se, Egypt, Israel, Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon, and the Palestinian territories, as well as Syria, it is Orthodox Christians who make up the majority of Christians. So when we talk about Christians in the Middle East, essentially we are talking about 2/3 of those being persecuted are our brother Orthodox brothers and sisters. 1/4 Catholic and 7% Protestant. As was alluded to earlier, in the Middle East, at the turn of the last century, now we're already into 2000, so it's the last century, 10% of the population historically was Christian. What is it today? As we said earlier, 4.85%. Similarly, in Constantinople, historically, before the so-called exchange of populations and the catastrophe that took place in mid-1915, 16, 20, 22, we were 20% of the population of Constantinople. From 20% to this number. Virtually non-existent. Virtually non-existence. Because ethnic and religious cleansing. If you're Christian, we don't want you. If you're Greek, we don't want you. And that's the reality. Regarding education, no more important a project that the archons assumed was to convince, and this is what it took, convince CBS News and Bob Simon to run a program on the ecumenical patriarchate and the religious freedom deficit in Turkey. Because at that time, this was a few years ago that this began, everyone thought, well, Turkey is a democracy, they're looking west, they want to join the European Union. How could they have a religious freedom deficit? That's impossible. So we met at 55th Street, CBS, took a shopping bag full of data the archons had collected, confiscated properties, interference in elections, all sorts of the pogroms, Spirovrionis' book, The Mechanism of Catastrophe. You were there, and I salute you and pay homage to you for being a survivor of that vicious attack on Greek Orthodox Christianity. And sure enough, they sent a crew, they investigated, they came back, and they said, you know, there is a story here. There is indeed a story, and we're going to send a crew. They sent 5 or 6 people to the Ecumenical Patriarchate, and the rest is history. It was the 14th highest rated show Christmas week. In fact, that program was so important in the education of the world regarding the religious freedom deficit of Turkey that the order and the archbishop felt it was appropriate to bestow the Athenagoras Human Rights Award to the 60 Minutes crew. And you see Jeff Fager, president of CBS. You see Bob Simon and Harry Ratliff, who was the producer of the series. And not only that, that series, that interview of His All Holiness, eventually led to 3 other documentaries, interviews, 60-minute segments on Orthodox Christianity. One, the exodus of Christians from the Holy Land. The 2-part series on the monks of Mount Athos. I'm sure many of you saw that as well. And then the persecution, Father, of the Coptics. And that all of these 4 in total originated from that first meeting at CBS Studios with a big shopping bag full of evidence, and I'm not a lawyer, I'm a physician, of evidence of religious freedom violations perpetrated by the government of Turkey. So now we will begin, for your own edification, see this great interview from Bob Simon.
I learned that one of the world's most important Christian leaders, second only to the Pope, lives in a country where 99% of the population is Muslim. His name is Bartholomew, and he's the patriarch of 300 million Orthodox Christians. He lives in Istanbul, Turkey, the latest in a line of patriarchs who've resided there since before there was a Turkey, since the centuries following the death of Jesus Christ. That's when Istanbul was called Constantinople and was the most important city in the Christian world. But times change, and in modern Muslim Turkey, the patriarch does not feel very welcome. Turkish authorities have seized Christian properties and closed Christian churches monasteries, and schools. His parishioners are afraid that the authorities want to force Bartholomew and his church, the oldest of all Christian churches, out of Turkey. His official title is impressive, His All Holiness Bartholomew, Archbishop of Constantinople, New Rome, Ecumenical Patriarch. Ecumenical means universal, and worldwide, 300 million Orthodox Christians look to him for spiritual guidance. We first met him in Istanbul. It was Easter, and worshippers from throughout the Orthodox Christian world had come to celebrate Christ's resurrection on the holiest day of their calendar with the man who they see as their Pope. My first question is this: how should I refer to you? As your All Holiness, as Patriarch, as Ecumenical Patriarch? What is the proper way to address you?
Bartholomew. The official title is Your All Holiness.
Your All Holiness.
But for me, Bartholomew is enough.
For him, perhaps, but not for us. And while His All Holiness may occupy the ecumenical throne, his quarters are a far cry from the Vatican. His office is cramped and relatively austere, his desk littered with papers. No Michelangelos here. All that's left of a Christian empire, once ruled from Istanbul, is a complex of 9 buildings, tightly squeezed onto less than an acre of land. Now, is this the Vatican of your church?
Well, our headquarters.
It's called the Phanar, and it's been the heart of Orthodox Christianity since 1599. His All Holiness promotes an informal atmosphere here. There's none of the ritual that surrounds the Pope in Rome. And there's no cathedral, only a modest church. The neighborhood that surrounds it used to be Greek and Christian, but today is predominantly Muslim. The Phanar is so small, our tour didn't take long.
Arkadaşlar aldı ama birisi ihbar etmiş.
It had just ended when a Turkish policeman informed the Patriarch that there was a threat on his life. It turned out to be nothing, but church officials say previous threats have been serious enough that the Phanar is surrounded by barbed wire and cameras, and the Patriarch has 24-hour protection. I think a lot of people would want to know, Your All Holiness, why the leader of so many millions of Orthodox Christians in the world lives in a country that is 99% Muslim.
Because we are here before this country becomes a Muslim country, much earlier, since the very beginning.
Since the very beginning of what?
Of the foundation of our church, of the Church of Constantinople.
And in the beginning, Istanbul was called Constantinople, the ancient city on the Bosphorus, where east meets west. The city's skyline is dominated by minarets. At Friday prayers, the mosques are teeming. But the city's richest and most renowned Christian churches are museums today, meccas for tourists, not for worshippers. From the Chora Church, with its fresco of Jesus, whose eyes seem to go right through you, to the Hagia Sophia, the first great church in Christendom and an architectural wonder built 1,000 years before St. Peter's in Rome, and for centuries, the most important church in the Christian world. Fast forward a few centuries, and it's hard to find Christians in Istanbul. This church holds 500 people, but during its Sunday services, its pews were practically empty. It was the same everywhere we went. At the turn of the last century, there were nearly 2 million Orthodox Christians in Turkey. 1.5 million were expelled in 1923, and another 150,000 left after violent anti-Christian riots in Istanbul in 1955. Today, in all of Turkey, there are only 4,000 Orthodox Christians left.
We are treated as citizens of second class.
You're treated as second-class citizens.
And we don't feel that we enjoy our full rights as Turkish citizens.
If you're treated as second-class citizens here, and you are Greek, why don't you go to Greece?
Because we love our country, we are born here, we want to die here. We feel that our mission is here, as it has been for 17 entire centuries.
17 centuries.
17 centuries. And I wonder why the authorities of our country do not respect this history.
To better understand the Patriarch's frustration, he suggested we head off on our own mission, 500 miles east of Istanbul, to a region called Cappadocia. We launched our search for this Christian history in a hot air balloon and came upon one of the most bizarre and dramatic landscapes on Earth. From above the clouds, it looks like a city of stone. And when you approach the cliffs, you see doors and windows carved by hand into the rock, eons ago. It's extraordinary enough from the outside, but open one of the doors and step inside, and you enter a world of unfathomable beauty. Chapels with frescoes painted while Rome was still ruled by the Caesars, and Bethlehem and Nazareth were dusty little towns. Are there any Christian remains as old as this in the Holy Land, in Jerusalem or Bethlehem?
Not that I know of.
Our guide, Sevim Karabayik, told us, much to our surprise, that the 4 Gospels were written in Turkey, and that 3 of the apostles spread the word here. There are hundreds of these churches in Cappadocia where Christians sought refuge from persecution. The oldest, built in the 5th century, when Christianity was in its infancy. Do you think many Christians realize it all started here in Turkey?
Personal experience? No.
It all started in the Holy Land
Land,
because that's where Jesus is
That's
from.
where it's taken shape.
Nobody disputes that. But the Christian religion began in Turkey.
In Anatolia, in Turkey.
The Patriarch then sent us to the depths of the Sinai Desert, to a Greek Orthodox monastery where early Christians also sought protection. It's called St. Catherine's, and it's located at the foot of Mount Sinai, where, according to tradition, Moses received the 10 Commandments. It's the oldest functioning monastery anywhere. There are 25 monks here today, servicing the smallest diocese in the world. The monks are all Greek, with one exception.
Altogether, we have 3,300 manuscripts written.
The chief librarian, overseeing an incomparable collection of ancient manuscripts, is Father Justin,
But most of these date from the 10th to the 14th century.
a converted Baptist from El Paso, Texas. He showed us the monastery's collection of Byzantine icons, the largest and oldest collection in the world. Then he took us to what the Patriarch really wanted us to see, a little-known letter written by the Prophet Muhammad almost 1,400 years ago, signed and sealed with his handprint, offering protection and religious freedom to the Christians of the monastery.
These are precedents from Muhammad himself for toleration and peace among people of differing faiths.
The Patriarch then brought us back to the 21st century and Turkey, to his own backyard. He took us for a ride on an island off of Istanbul in a carriage with a police escort. The Patriarch wanted to show us that Muhammad's message of tolerance has not been received by the Turkish authorities. His prime example, the Halki School of Theology, the only Greek Orthodox seminary in Turkey, empty and abandoned. No priests, no prayers. Thank you, Your Holiness. It's very kind of you. The Halki was closed down by Turkish authorities after passage of a law banning private higher education. That was back in 1971.
It's a pity and a shame. It's a crime to keep such a school closed, unused, for no reason. Why?
Reasons of state.
Reasons of state.
As a consequence, the church can't train new priests, potential new patriarchs, who under Turkish law have to be born in Turkey. It's as if Rome closed down the College of Cardinals. The hallways where 100 young seminarians roamed are desolate now. The library's priceless collection of old manuscripts lies untouched. Walk into a classroom, and it seems as if the students had just gone home today, not 38 years ago.
This school prepared people who preached peace, preached unity, preached love. So, not giving to the church the possibility to prepare these people, we offend human dignity.
The patriarch says it not only offends human dignity, it offends him personally, because this is his alma mater. Halki is where he studied to be a priest.
So you studied in a classroom just like this?
Yes, for 7 years.
The patriarch was born, Demetrius Archondonis, in Turkey.
Christos Anesti Seolus.
Like all Turkish citizens, he served in the Turkish army. He was ordained at the age of 21 and elected ecumenical patriarch in 1991. But the Turkish government does not recognize the ecumenical or international part of his title. To them, he is merely a local bishop.
I have visited the Prime Minister, submitting our problems, concrete problems, and asking why, and asking to help us.
Do you get answers?
Never.
Do you sometimes fear that the community will be wiped out?
Not really. We survived. We do believe in miracles.
And that, the patriarch says, is because Turkey is also the Holy Land, spiritually not very far from Jerusalem.
And this is the continuation of Jerusalem, and for us it is equally a holy and sacred land. We prefer to stay here, even crucified sometimes, because in the Gospel it is written that it is given to us not only to believe in Christ, but also to suffer for Christ.
You said even to be crucified sometimes.
Yes, because we believe in the resurrection. After the crucifixion, resurrection comes.
Do you feel personally, Your Holiness, that you are being crucified sometimes?
Yes, I do.
And it's okay to applaud because this was a very courageous act. Think of it. Think of it, the ecumenical patriarch in a country that persecutes Christians being so bold as to say, I feel crucified in my own country. Now, we take a moment to pay our respect to Bob Simon, and I thought it was most interesting and appropriate that this is a man who brought to bear and pronounced to the world the religious freedom crisis that is asphyxiating the ecumenical patriarchate. And when was he born? On May 29th, the day Constantinople fell. Is that unbelievable? Anyway, a good friend, God rest his soul, a good man. He will be missed. So, do you feel crucified in your own country? Yes, I do. And what did that do? That sparked an introspection in the country of Turkey. And they said, maybe in fact we are crucifying this man. That was a figurative statement, perhaps. But the next day, you saw images like this plastered throughout the Turkish press. Again, figurative. Who would have thought that this concept would have metastasized and morphed into this that is happening today and yesterday and tomorrow in the Middle East? Actual crucifixions because of witnessing their own faith, being Christian. From the figurative to the literal to the horrific. Again, we pay homage and respect to these martyrs that were recently canonized by the Coptic Orthodox Pope, and this canonization just took place a few days ago of the 21 martyrs who were butchered in Libya. And we know the story of Miriam Ibrahim, who was convicted of marrying an Orthodox Christian when she herself was Christian. She is now, thank God, in the United States under protection. Churches desecrated, destroyed in Turkey and the Middle East. Icons, faces of which have been desecrated. And of course, the Syrian Orthodox bishops. 2 years ago, they were kidnapped and they have not been seen, heard. We pray that they have survived this ordeal. Our own monasteries in Constantinople. Grenades have been thrown at the Patriarchate. When we as pilgrims have been to the Ecumenical Patriarchate, we've been harassed by authorities. Our passports confiscated. Assassination attempts and plots have been uncovered by the Turkish authorities against His All Holiness. Now let's pause for a moment and see the martyria, if you will, of our ecumenical patriarchs. And I direct you to Sir Stephen Runciman's famous book, The Great Church in Captivity. And he did an analysis of the 159 modern-day ecumenical patriarchs from the 15th to the 21st centuries. Only 21 died of natural causes, 105 driven away by Turks, 27 abdicated, and 6 died violent deaths. Perhaps the most iconic of all those violent deaths was the hanging of great ecumenical patriarch V. Less than a month after Greece proclaimed its independence, Bishop Germanos, from the Ottoman yoke. So what did the Sultan do? While the ecumenical patriarch was still in his sacred vestments, dragged him out of the church, hanged him at the royal gate, the gate of the entrance to the Fanar, and there he hung for days before a group tore him down and dragged him throughout the city and threw his body in the Bosporus. The horrific events that have taken place have brought together our spiritual fathers. Senior Apostolic Father, Pope Francis, with his brother, the 269th successor of Andrew, and I believe Pope Francis is the 264th successor of Peter. Peter and Andrew were brothers, you recall, apostolic brothers. And here we are in Jerusalem last May on the 50th anniversary of Pope Paul VI and Athenagoras lifting the anathemas. We didn't speak to each other for 800 years, Catholics, Orthodox. And the ecumenical patriarch and the Pope said, enough is enough, let's speak, let's begin a dialogue of love, which merged into a dialogue of truth, and this was the 50th anniversary. And in their joint declaration, coming from the Holy Sepulchre, and I'll read it, from this holy city of Jerusalem, we express our shared profound concern for the situation of Christians in the Middle East and for their right to remain full citizens of their homelands. In trust, we turn to the Almighty and merciful God in a prayer for peace in the Holy Land and in the Middle East in general. We especially pray for the churches that we're talking about: Egypt, Syria, and Iraq, which have suffered most grievously due to recent events. And then 6 months later, at a papal visitation for our patronal feast of St. Andrew, November 30th, in their joint declaration again, they express our concern for the current situation in Iraq, Syria, and the whole Middle East. We are united in the desire for peace and stability and in the will to promote the resolution of conflicts through dialogue and reconciliation. It was a great personal privilege to witness these historic events both in Jerusalem and in Constantinople at the Phanar. And I have to tell you, Father John, there is a great fraternity between our spiritual fathers, I have to tell you. They look after each other. There's a great love, a mutual respect, and it just is a wonderful thing to see our Catholic brothers and Orthodox brothers and sisters speak and try to come. You know, the goal, and they say it in their joint communions and declarations, is for full communion. That's the goal. So God willing, that'll happen someday. So what are the issues of the religious freedom deficit, the specific issues that we as archons bring to the attention of the highest authorities on this side of the Atlantic and on the other side of the Atlantic? And what I mean by the other side of the Atlantic is the European Union, because there is activity for Turkey to join the EU, and in Ankara, where we have met all the ministers, met with the Prime Minister, Foreign Minister, Minister of Interior. Anyway, in the eyes of the Turkish government, the ecumenical patriarchate doesn't exist. It simply doesn't exist. It does not have legal personality, no corporate entity. If you don't exist as a legal entity, you really have no rights. You can't buy, inherit, or sell property. How do you exist as a corporate entity and not have your own property? In 1936, when the government of Turkey required all charitable institutions to register their properties, the Greek Orthodox Church registered some 8,000 to 10,000 properties. And over the years, the government has systematically been confiscating these properties to the point where today there are less than 500 remaining. So what happened? To address this point that we have been raising for many years with the Turkish government, the Prime Minister a few years ago, at the breaking of the Ramadan fast, the Iftar dinner as they refer to it, said, as Prime Minister, I'm going to issue an edict that, or decree that will return the properties. After all, these never belonged to us. Great fanfare, big publicity. There's Erdogan with the aqua tie, with his All Holiness and other religious minority members in Turkey, saying that we're going to return your properties. We don't own them. You deserve them. So 3 years later, what has happened? Virtually nothing. Virtually nothing. All the hoopla, the 1,000 properties that are going to be returned. The Americans have a great term for that, and as a page in the Senate, I learned this word too, and that is boondoggle. What's the definition of boondoggle? It's work, as sometimes Congress members do, I hate to tell Archon Gus Bilirakis, but work or activity that is wasteful or pointless, but gives the appearance of having value. Now, this is what Turkey is doing. They have projects that are empty promises, half-truths, in essence, a huge boondoggle. And that's what has transpired there. We've requested the 1,000 properties, and we have our own attorneys, and Judge Bazanelis is part of that, Archon Judge Bazanelis. And we've registered, and we've gone through the very circuitous legal path of trying to get these properties back, and we've gotten a handful. And they tend to be the worthless properties. Yet we own properties, and had owned properties, on the Bosporus, and in very expensive neighborhoods of Istanbul. You know, Istanbul has 15 million people, more than New York City. Can you imagine the property value of those of the real estate we have held in the past? Another thing, the third issue, lack of legal personality, cannot buy or sell property. 3, the government of Turkey actually interferes in the election of the patriarch, of the ecumenical patriarch. Now, you know, many of you may think, well, this is just an administrative issue, big deal, they interfere, he has to be a Turkish citizen. Well, when you stop and think about your Orthodox faith, there is a direct link from the person on your far right and Jesus Christ on your far left through St. Andrew. His All Holiness is the 269th successor of St. Andrew, who was the first called apostle of Jesus Christ. So when the government makes a determination that we will decide who will be your patriarch, or we will veto ones that we don't like, and they have vetoed individuals that they have not liked, they interfere in the spiritual connection we have with Jesus Christ through St. Andrew and all the succeeding ecumenical patriarchs. So it's just not an administrative interference. We believe that the Holy Spirit enlightens the synod to vote for whomever they wish to vote. Another issue is the non-use of the term ecumenical. It isn't a huge issue now because they sort of laid off on this, and that, in fact, there was an official university presentation of an honorary doctorate to His All Holiness last May, a year ago, in which they used in the invitation for the first time in the history of the Turkish governments in 1923 the term ecumenical patriarch. You are invited to the bestowing of an honorary doctorate to His All Holiness Ecumenical. So that was a plus thing. And the fact of the matter, the whole world recognizes him as ecumenical patriarch since the 5th century. Then what we talked about with Bob Simon. 44 years ago, Chalki was closed. It was shut down. It hasn't been reopened. There have been a number of times in which our enthusiasm and our hopes were raised very, very high, only to be completely disappointed, disgusted, and quite frankly heartbroken, because there were several episodes in which we really thought we had turned the corner on this. But in fact, that's not happening, and it hasn't opened, and we have not seen any real movement in this area, to tell you the truth, despite the empty promises. So what have we done as archons? You know, this is really great because I was not consulted on this. Preserve our Christian identity. You know, we go to the places you're going to see as Orthodox Christians. Organize ourselves for success. We do our background homework. you know, President Clinton just didn't go to the Ecumenical Patriarchate. The Vice President just didn't go to the Fanar twice, or Secretary Clinton just by divine providence, you know, I shouldn't say that, by happenstance. Divine providence made it happen. Dialogue with the public. Stand up for ourselves, invest in the cause. You know, this is more or less, thanks you for creating our mission statement, very well articulated. But this is what we do. In the United States, we work in Washington. We go to Washington often with the president. And I have to say, it's not your personal politics. You know, whether you're a Democrat, a Republican, independent, libertarian, communist, whatever you are, this transcends politics. And here we met with Dennis McDonough when he was Deputy National Security Advisor. Now, as you know, he's the Chief of Staff of the President. This is at the West Wing, where we've been a number of times. The State Department, where we go often. John Podesta, who probably will be Secretary Clinton's campaign manager, if it happens. Who knows what's going to happen, but interesting. But in the West Wing, he was a senior counselor to the president. His mother was Greek Orthodox, his father Roman Catholic. And if you look in his office in the West Wing, what do you see there? Orthodox, you know, icons, some of which, and the one that was given to him by His All Holiness, you can't see. It's the beautiful icon of St. Andrew that I had in that four-icon depiction earlier with the patriarch and Jesus Christ. But anyway, John Podesta is very sensitive to the religious freedom deficit and concerns of the Orthodox Christians. And that's why we meet with him. Ed Royce, the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee. Again, we need the people who make the decisions, the appropriations, the policies of the U.S. government vis-a-vis Turkey, we educate as your goal states. So you go, you leave your practice, you leave your family, you hire someone to cover you, and you go. And you know, Jay Sekulow, who we've had a great working relationship, said, you know, there's such a thing called the ministry of presence. The ministry of presence. That means you got to show up. And showing up is half the battle. It's more than half the battle, because our strategy has been, wherever Turkey looks, we are there. Whether it's to the White House, the State Department, and you'll see the other places. United States Commission on International Religious Freedom. Wherever there is a Turkish presence, we are there to counteract and educate the policymakers so they know the reality that exists in Turkey. They used to be the worst religious freedom violator. The ASERF, the USERF, U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, has categorized them as a Tier 2 watch list country. In other words, one of the worst violators of religious freedom, along with Afghanistan, Cuba, you know, Indonesia, Russia. So before that, they were in the worst category. In fact, you recall last year when the Deputy Prime Minister was saying, you know, wouldn't it be great if we converted Hagia Sophia back into a mosque? It really needs to be a mosque again. Well, you know, we were very concerned that was going to happen, because one, they had done it to two other Hagia Sophias in Turkey. One in Nicaea, where the Nicene Creed was established at the Second Ecumenical Council. And two, they did it at another ancient Saint Sophia in Trabzon, near the Black Sea. So when the Deputy Prime Minister starts talking about converting Hagia Sophia into a mosque, we drop everything, we spend 2 days in Washington seeing the top officials, and we had USERF make a statement and send a letter to the Prime Minister of Turkey to publicly reject the bill and affirm that Hagia Sophia's current status will be maintained, that is a museum. Because they passed a law in the Grand National Assembly, which is the Turkish parliament, to convert Hagia Sophia into a mosque. Can you imagine what a provocative act that would be? So, ministry of presence. Another ministry of presence is the archons have, in every state of the union, have tried to pass a religious freedom resolution in the state legislature because, one, it educates the faithful like us here in this room. Two, the priests. Three, the local politicians. And four, the government of Turkey, because when these religious freedom resolutions are passed in each state, they are given to the ambassador of Turkey to the United States, who then takes them to the prime minister. So in 2008, we started this. We only had 19 resolutions in 16 states. All the red states didn't pass anything. Look where we are today. Nearly every state, 94% of the United States population, we have passed religious freedom resolutions. And you think passing a religious freedom resolution in North and South Dakota is easy? Let me tell you, it's not. Very few, you can count the Orthodox Christians in those states. But our Catholic friends, our Jewish friends, and the common core value of religious freedom, no one could say no to. And that's how we got it done. There are a few more states that need work, but we're very pleased that 53 resolutions in 43 states. And Stefan Georgeson of this metropolis in Atlanta headed that initiative. And you know, the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese have always championed human rights and freedoms in this country. And here we celebrate 50 years of Archbishop Iakovos walking side by side Martin Luther King in Selma, Alabama. We all remember this Life magazine cover. I have that at home. And this is a quote that everyone must remember. When Archbishop Iakovos was asked by Father Theodore Hesburgh at Notre Dame, who, by the way, Notre Dame just beat Duke last night. I don't know if you caught that. That really hurt when I saw that. Maybe I should skip the slide. Anyway, when my friend Dr. King called me to travel to Selma, I had to go. My conscience told me I had to stand up with Dr. King for civil rights and justice for fellow citizens. Now, this is the key sentence. You must understand that I was born a slave. I was born in Turkey. So 50 years later, now we have Archbishop Demetrius with the offspring of Martin Luther King, Bernice King, his daughter, and Martin Luther King III. With the president, with the representative, the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and where's that pointer? I direct your attention to the Archbishop over here. Why do we go to Europe, the Archons? Because every 6 months, and we don't go every 6 months because it's really difficult to do that, but every 6 months there is a rotating European presidency in which Turkey's negotiations with the EU are brought up and analyzed and determine whether they should continue the negotiation process. I see my friends Jimmy and Pauline Katrikas from Philadelphia. Good to see you folks. And our European initiatives can be summarized with these logos. The EU rotating presidency, the European Court of Human Rights, where we have presented oral arguments on behalf of the Ecumenical Patriarchate. Of course, our friends at the U.S. Embassy in Ankara. And some of our trips have been canceled because of the rioting that took place last year and the smell of tear gas in the embassy. And when Ambassador Ricciardoni said, when I called him, I said, we're in Istanbul, should we go? I know we're reading on the TV that there's been unrest in Ankara. He says, well, this time, let's sit this one out, we'll connect another time. The Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. Here we are a number of years ago, Archbishop Demetrius of America, Metropolitan Emmanuel of France, and Metropolitan Meliton of the Phanar at the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg, France. And Jay Sekulow was very helpful, and his team at the European Center for Law and Justice, the ECLJ. Here we are in Budapest, Hungary, when the nation of Hungary had the rotating presidency. And these are attorneys, Judge Bazanelis and Archon here, our national secretary. And the deacon is a Greek Orthodox, speaks fluent Turkish, obviously Greek, English, and is a trained attorney. So he's stationed at the Phanar, and he helps with the return of confiscated properties that really hasn't been happening. And I have this slide to honor my dear friend Nick Boris of blessed memory, because he came one of the very first Archon trips to Ankara in 2002, and we posed at the 9/11 Memorial Orchard. At the U.S. Embassy in Ankara, there is a memorial orchard commemorating 9/11. And here we are, we presented a California redwood tree to the embassy as a gift from the Archons. They planted it, and we came back a number of years later at the same site, and we've been back since then, but I wanted to show these two similar slides to kind of demonstrate the longevity, again, an example of the ministry of presence. And this is the guy who called for the conversion of Hagia Sophia into a practicing mosque. He's the deputy prime minister, the number 2 in Turkey. And this is, how we have to deal with him. Gormez, he's in the news a lot lately. In fact, just yesterday, if you Google his name, you'll see that Austria just passed a law curtailing some of the extreme activities of the religion of Islam in Austria. Well, he spoke very loudly against that yesterday, and he's more concerned about Islamophobia than religious freedom. And I guess we can all understand why we fear certain factions of Islam, not the whole religion, but certain factions of religion, of that particular religion. And we also have a very close working relationship with all the religious minorities in Turkey. The Armenians, Roman Catholics, Protestants, Alevi Muslims. There's a sect of Islam, Alevi Muslims, that comprise 17 million people in Turkey, and yet they have the same lack of rights that we as Orthodox Christians do. The OSCE is another area in which we have a delegation go, this time by Gus Karas, former Leadership 100. That's the thing about these Archons, I tell you, they're just super outstanding individuals. You have them here in your own parish. He's past president of Leadership 100, on his parish council in Wilmington, Delaware, doesn't miss a national council meeting every month, and now he did the same thing. Left his family, went to Warsaw, Poland, where we make 2 presentations to the OSCE, comprised of 55 countries, and it's the largest human rights convention in all of Europe. So we do that. We've been doing it for years. And when we go all over Europe, diplomats tell us, oh, we saw your presentation at the OSCE meetings. Andy Economou and the Sekulows outside the Phanar when Pope Francis had visited the Ecumenical Patriarch on the feast day of St. Andrew. You know, the importance of our own leaders visiting the Fanar. President Obama didn't actually go to the Fanar. He met His Royal Holiness privately at a hotel. We were very disappointed. He didn't do what Bill Clinton did. Actually go to the Fanar. It's Father Alex, and I want to publicly pay tribute to Father Alex because he works indefatigably for the ecumenical patriarchate and the needs and religious freedom, with the full blessing and support of Archbishop Demetrius of America and the Synod of the Metropolitans. And here is the Vice President taking a tour of the Patriarchal Cathedral of St. George. It was an excellent visit. He was there over 2 hours. I had the privilege quietly and unofficially to have lunch with him, and Father Alex and I met with him privately on these specific issues. And I must say, the Vice President is the strong advocate of religious freedom for the ecumenical patriarchate. And again, leave your politics aside. You know, he's the Vice President of the United States, the President of the United States, the Secretary of State. These are the positions that these people hold. We've had 2 religious freedom conferences held by, and think how difficult it must be. You organize this conference here locally. Think about organizing a conference halfway around the world. And having speakers from around the world. It's a monumental $500,000 project, each one. And the first one was held where? At the European Parliament. Now, we had the cooperation of Greece and the official representative of the Ecumenical Patriarch to even get into the Parliament. But again, when you're advocating for religious freedom, who can say no? Right, Gus? Who can say no? And Gus, I met your brother Peter today, and it's a real privilege to be with him. So the first one was at the European Parliament. The next one, the theme was tearing down walls. Now, what better city in all the world than Berlin, Germany, tearing down walls? And that's what we did. And we had who's who on religious freedom from the United States, Europe, and Turkey. A who's who. And again, this was a $500,000 project that we raised the monies from ourselves. Everyone was asked. We didn't go to outside archons. It was all internally raised. It's so easy when you have all the competing worthy charities that the church has. But it was a very successful education of decision makers. There's our friend Jay Sekulow. And I won't go over. We had Muslims there. We had Christians, Jews. We had all the denominations. We had diplomats, politicians, journalists, scholars. Our good friend Dr. Andy, Metropolitan of Biloforos, the dean of Kalki, once and if it ever opens, gave an excellent presentation. Orhan Kamel Cengiz, outstanding human rights attorney. You know, they murdered, these fundamental Muslims murdered these Bible publishers, Protestant Bible publishers. Say that a few times quickly. In the heartland of the Anatolian Peninsula, in Malatya, Turkey. This guy, the justice system is different in Turkey, and the victim needs to hire an attorney. This guy, Cengiz, was the attorney for the victims of the murdered publishers of Bibles. There were some Turks and one German. And this was our religious freedom. I won't read all of that. It's all self-explanatory. George Rackus, Boston, was the chair of that. You saw John Zavitsanos a few weeks ago here. He was part of that, Chris Stratakis and Judge Bazanellis. Do I have time to do St. Nicholas or not? Evan, I want to take 2 minutes to talk. We're over 2 minutes. I'm going to go through it really quickly. You know, St. Nicholas represents very symbolic in this current context, because this was a church that was initially built in 1832, established in 1922, and it was the only religious structure that was destroyed by the radical Muslims when they attacked the United States of America on that day, fateful day, 9/11. You know, our Archbishop went to Ground Zero immediately. He ministered to the victims. And the rebuilding of St. Nicholas, I'm going to tell this again, the rebuilding of St. Nicholas represents good over evil, life over death. And the rebuilding is really a reflection and connection to Hagia Sophia, the ecumenical patriarchate. So that's what I wanted to say, that there's a connection between the rebuilding of St. Sophia and this is another slide I want you all to appreciate. How providential that St. Nicholas, and the word Nicholas means victory of the people. Well, the people are going to be victorious by rebuilding St. Nicholas after it was destroyed by evil forces. And it's going to triple in size, and it's going to be a magnificent testament to good over evil. And I'm not going to go through the movie. And if you look carefully, this is Ground Zero. Thank you. This is St. Nicholas, which is going to be made of luminous material. So this will be a beacon of piety, of religious freedom, of good over evil. These are the two pools. This is the North Tower, where it once stood, and the South Tower. This is the Freedom Tower. So we have an extraordinary position. You know, the Catholics have St. Patrick's. Great place. Now we have our own Hagia Sophia, our own Parthenon combination at Ground Zero, and millions of people will be visiting this sacred shrine. And one last thing I want to say about these two pools, memorial pools. Nearly 3,000 victims died on that fateful day on September 11th. This is the pool, and from the pool are 2,900 and some odd spouts, individual spouts of water representing each lost soul of that day. And all coming together, mixing together as one human kind body, and then mixing together. So that is St. Nicholas. That's what it's going to look like. And I want to go through, and this is the families of victims of 9/11 bringing holy water, ayazma, for the ground blessing of St. Nicholas that took place a couple months ago. There's Governor Pataki, the Archbishop, the many people who were there. We all had a chance to inscribe our names on the foundation of St. Nicholas. It's quite a thrill. And, you know, it was very symbolic. It took, the cornerstone was comprised of two cairns. A cairn is a memorial collection of stones built up in imitation of the cairn at Gilgal. It's an Old Testament reference that the prophet Joshua fashioned to commemorate the crossing over of the Israelites into the Promised Land. But two were constructed, each symbolic of the Twin Towers. It was quite dramatic. Now, if you look carefully at this picture, you're going to see Archon Regional Commander praying in the background. And this is the church. It'll probably open in a couple of years. I just want to emphasize it represents the victory of good over evil. Go to our website. You'll see a lot of information, a lot of resources. John Mandala, stand up. John is responsible for all the education material, the website, and the creative design of all the work of the Archons, and he deserves a lot of praise. Next week, he'll be accompanying me to Oxford University, where I will be giving a similar presentation on behalf of the Order of St. Andrew in the subject at Oxford University will be religious freedom in Turkey. And we're locked and loaded for that presentation, I'll tell you that right now. And now, we want to offer our gratitude and respect to His Eminence, Metropolitan Alexios of Atlanta, who offered his blessings, to Father Philemon. Archon John, would you step forward for a moment? I wanted to present to you, Father Philemon, please join us. These cufflinks of St. Andrew the Apostle. Why don't you get in the middle, and we'll...
God.
And please wear them.
Thank you.
In remembrance of the order, especially in remembrance of the martyria of the Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew.
Thank you.
With your
Dr.
blessings.
Anthony. May the Lord bless. Thank you. Hey, John, are you going to stay here? We'll take a photo. Just for a minute, Doctor.
Come and
Thank you so much.
you're the MC. Let's take a quick picture here. All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
And we want to just recognize the principals and the benefactors. Archon Spell, thank you, man. This is what you left, and this is what I left to come here. Okay. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, thank you.
All right. Thank you.
You did a beautiful job.
Thank you.
Now, there can be no symposium without a couple of questions. Would you mind taking a couple of questions? And then we don't have much time for more, so let me share. Who wants to ask a question? Dr. Pappas.
That is correct. That is correct. Now, what has the Turkish government to react to that protestation that we have been bringing up? What the Turkish government has done was they set up a program in which any hierarch around the world who wants to become a Turkish citizen may do so, and they will waive the 5-year residency requirement. Now, again, it's boondoggle. Why? Because it sounds great, you know, anyone applies to become a citizen, we'll give it to them. Well, in fact, that doesn't happen. You apply, and some of the most talented bishops have been denied citizenship. And only in the past couple of weeks has a couple of those more talented bishops, and not saying more talented, but more experienced maybe, have been granted the citizenship they requested. But again, they make these pronouncements and then don't follow up.
Thank you. Another last question, please. Yes, sir, over there.
You know, unfortunately, I don't have that knowledge myself. Maybe some of my co-speakers might, but I do not with respect to Christian refugees to the United States. I don't know. Maybe Father Saba might have better understanding of that.
Okay, thank you very much for this presentation, Dr. Limirakis. We will take a 3-minute break. Just stand up and stretch, and we'll start right back in about 3 minutes. So